I'm John McQuay with 8541 Tactical, and we're here today to talk to you guys about this guy right here. This is the Kahles K624i rifle scope. Now, HPS is the U.S. distributor for Kahles, and they were nice enough to send this scope over to us, and let's have a little bit of time shooting it and playing with it, and they wanted to know what we thought about it. So we're bringing our impression of this scope to you guys. Now, the K624i is a 6-24 power first focal plane rifle scope with a 56mm objective. So that really places it kind of in the upper end of the magnification range that we use or that we commonly find in precision rifle competition scopes. Usually they're in the 5 to 20 power range. There are some that venture as far up as 30 power like the Bushnell XRS. And there are other scopes that tend to stay on the lower end in the 3 to 15 power range. But this one is kind of in the middle. 6 to 24 is a comfortable range for what you would use for most of the stuff you find at a precision rifle competition. You have a low 6 power that you can use if you have closer up, wider spread targets to give you a wider field of view. And the 24 power really allows you to get up there in the magnification range if you have to find small targets on a target board, or you have to identify a target before you fire on it, or you just have a really long range smaller target. So it is a very useful magnification range. And with the glass in the K624i, that 24 power is fully usable. Some scopes, they will kind of fudge that magnification. They'll throw a really high top-end magnification in there, but you start to lose optical clarity when you get up to that high magnification range. We really didn't have a lot of drop-off with the clarity in the K624i at that 24 power range, so I consider that fully usable. If the mirage and the environmental conditions will allow you to use that, you can stay up there and use that 24 power range without getting really irritated about it. Now, one of the marquee features of the K624i is the placement of the parallax turret. Normally you would find the parallax turret on the left-hand side of the rifle scope. This can be a little bit of an issue in some situations for a right-handed shooter to go to adjust that parallax while they're on the gun. If you are using your left hand, or for a right-handed shooter, your support side to support the rifle in either a prone position or against a barricade or something, then it's kind of a pain in the butt to try to reach over and across with your firing hand to adjust that parallax and to get a solid enough position to make a good parallax adjustment. With the K624i, they put the parallax ring at the bottom of the elevation turret. So you can actually reach it with either hand just as easily, and you can really quickly get your parallax dialed in, and it moves very smoothly and very easily. It doesn't bind. We didn't have any problems at all getting things dialed in. So it's a really, really neat arrangement. Now, we do still have a turret over here on the left-hand side, and this is the illumination turret. So that controls the illumination for your reticle. And we didn't have any problems with the illumination. We didn't do a lot of night shooting, but I took it out into a lot of different lighting environments throughout the city, and the illumination worked just fine. If you need an illuminated reticle, this one will do you fine. Now, the model that we have here has a new reticle in it for Kahles, and it is the Skimmer 2 reticle. It was a reticle designed by Shannon Kay, and it was really one of two versions that he designed. The Skimmer 2 is my preference for the reticle in this optic because it is a mill-based reticle, and it has what we generally call a Christmas tree in it. So when you come off the center of the reticle, you have hold points that go out into what is normally dead space in the reticle. So let's say that you were in a no dial stage and you couldn't dial elevation and you don't want to dial windage, then you can take your elevation and your windage call and you'll have a definite point to hold on. Say you need 2 mils of elevation, well, you just come down your reticle to your 2 mil point and say your wind call is 1.5 mils. Well, you can hold off 1.5 mils and you can actually have a definite point on the reticle to hold off of. You're not just holding out into dead space where there are no markings. So it allows you to get holds for elevation and windage much more precisely than you can with a standard crosshair. Now, if you don't like the Christmas tree, the skimmer reticle does not have a Christmas tree. The skimmer 2 has the Christmas tree. And I was able to use it very quickly to get quick hits without dialing. More recently, the more I start to work these stages with lower and lower time limits, I just leave the turrets zeroed out and do everything I need to do through the reticle. It just works a little bit easier for me. There are guys that like to do mixed dialing. They'll dial a coarse elevation adjustment on, and then they'll hold for the fine elevation between targets. If you like to do that, that's great. You can still do that with this scope. I just prefer to do a hold off of a 0. That way I know in my brain where I'm supposed to be automatically in the reticle without having to think about it. So this scope supports that really well. We do have 14 mil per rev turrets, so 1 rev of the turret gives you 14 mils in elevation, which is a massive amount. And this little red dot on the top here is a second rev indicator. So as you get up here on your second rev, the little red spot will pop up and you have a visual and tactile indicator that you're on the second revolution of your scope. When you come back down, the turret is set up to allow you to swing, in this case 3/10 of a mil below 0. So you can go 3/10 below and then come back up 3/10 and you're dead on your 0. You can't go any more than 3/10 below 0. Now the windage turret is marked just like I like to see windage turrets marked here. We have 1R, 2R, 3R indicating that you're going right, and 1L, 2L, 3L, etc. indicating that you're going left, all the way around to 7. So you do have 14 mils per rev on the windage as well, but 7 is your center point, and 7 is not marked because it's the center. So you got 6R, then 7, and then it starts the other way, 6L, etc. And you can zero this turret out just like you can the elevation turret. So you can get that right back on 0, and of course 0 is marked 0. Now let's talk about the zeroing of the elevation turret real quickly. I didn't feel that this was covered really well in the manual. I always read the manual through before I go to zero one of these rifle scopes. Sometimes if I'm doing stuff just for myself, I don't necessarily do that, and I just kind of monkey through it to see how hard it is to figure it out. In this case, I did read the manual because this is going back to HPS when we're done with it. I want to break their scope. Breaking it was not the concern, but it was a little bit confusing to me to figure out how to get this zeroed out, because when we initially went to zero it, we needed to go below where the 0 stop was set from the factory. And in the manual, there was initially no really easy way to figure out how to do this, because the clicks in the 0 stop is all in the turret. You don't mess with any of that at all. The only adjustment you have is to be able to loosen up the set screws and slip the turret back to 0. So if you get this scope and you drop the scope on your rifle and you need to zero it, and you find yourself hitting the 0 stop and still needing to dial below the 0 stop, what you do is you hit the 0 stop, you loosen up the set screws, and then you slip the turret forward. So slip the turret like you're going up, and then tighten your screws back down again, and now you'll be able to dial below where that stop was set, because the 0 stop and the click mechanism is integrated into the turret cap, not in the stem like we see a lot of other scopes. So once you figure that out, it's very quick to zero. It's very simple to zero. In fact, it is one of the simplest scopes to have an integrated 0 stop and second rev indicator that I've used to zero. It's really simple and really easy once you figure that out. And again, maybe it was just my reading comprehension, but that was not clearly spelled out in the manual. It took me a second reading, and it took me actually loosening the cap up and playing with it a little bit before I figured it out. And then once I figured it out, I was good to go. The second issue that we ran into on this is when you're reading through the manual, it makes it very clear that they don't want you to tighten down those screws too tight. So I did what I normally do, and they supply a very small Allen key with the scope. I used that small Allen key and I grabbed the small end of the Allen key, so the long end was going into the screws, and I tightened it down until that key really started to flex. I felt like I was putting a lot of pressure on there, so that's where I stopped. Well, the first competition I shot with this, it was a local competition, thankfully. The scope sat in the sun for quite a bit during the competition, partially on purpose, and partially just because that's where I set my rifle. And apparently that warmed up the turret and gave just a little bit of extra slack, and I went to dial a stage and grabbed it and turned it, and the turret slipped. That is one disadvantage of having the zero stop integrated into the turret cap, because once it slipped, the zero stop slipped as well. I've had scopes before where the cap has slipped and the zero stop has stayed on there, so it makes it a very quick and easy function to slam the turret against the zero stop and then slip it back to where you know the zero stop was set and you're good to go. Couldn't do that on this one, so I was kind of out of the game for the last couple of stages on that. Spoke with HPS, and HPS said not to worry, that you can go ahead and put a good deal of tension on those set screws and not worry about damaging the inner turrets. That can be an issue on some scopes because the inner turrets may be brass and the set screws may be steel, and putting a lot of tension on them can dig into those stems. That apparently is not a concern with this one. They said you can put a lot more tension on it, so I went ahead and did before we went and did any of the tracking drills, and we've had no problems since. So I'll go ahead and put that one on me. I didn't tighten down the set screws tight enough. I won't ding the scope for that. But it's something that you guys, if you purchase the scope, need to bear in mind, that you may need to put a little bit more tension than you think you need on the set screws to hold the adjustments. Now, we took the scope out and we had it mounted on our Accuracy International AT with the proof carbon fiber barrel and the Thunderbeast 30P1 suppressor on it, and the scope performed excellent. We went ahead and did a vertical tracking drill, and the scope tracked true, it tracked vertical. We didn't have any track out, and that's one of the main things that I will watch for. What I'll do is I'll put a board out and I will take a carpenter's level and I will I'll draw a vertical and a horizontal line, and with the rifle mounted on the scope mounted on the rifle, I will set the reticle plumb to those horizontal and vertical lines. And as I do the vertical tracking drill, I will dial an adjustment on the scope, and I will keep the reticle centered on the center of the horizontal and vertical lines I draw my target. So I know that the scope is being held in exactly the same horizontal plane for every shot I fire. And as I shoot, I'll dial up, fire another shot, dial up, fire another shot. In this case, I dialed 2 mils for every shot because I really didn't want to spend a whole lot of ammo, and I wanted to get a decent amount of elevation. And the shots tracked true. I went ahead and shot 1 shot for every 2 mils tracking up, and then came back down firing 1 shot for every 2 mils. And the shots track straight along the vertical line that I drew. And what that tells me is it tells me that the adjustment mechanism for the turrets is true to the reticle inside of it. So as long as when you mount your scope, you level the scope to the reticle, then you're going to be good to go. And in this case, we actually did both. With the Alamo 4-star D-lock mount here, I set the scope in with the bottom of the turret housing plumb to the reticle, and when I mounted it up, the bottom of the turret housing plumb to the mount. And when we dropped it on the rifle, everything lined up and we were good to go. So vertical tracking was great. We also ran a return to zero drill on it, to where I'd fire a shot, I'd crank it all the way up to its vertical limit of the scope, crank it all the way back down, hit the zero stop, come back to zero, and then fire a shot again. And I did this several times, shooting groups, and the groups I was able to get shooting like that, dialing all the way up and dialing all the way back down, were within the mechanical accuracy of the rifle with the previous rifle scope that was on it, and within the mechanical accuracy of the rifle with this scope mounted on it and having it just held at zero, no turret adjustment. So that worked very, very well. Didn't see any change of point of impact with the adjustment of the magnification. On very low quality scopes, occasionally you can find that if you shoot a group with the scope set at, say, 24 power, and then you dial the scope back to 10 power and you shoot a group, you can see that the point of impact shifts slightly. that is an indicator that that scope is broken or it is a very low quality scope. Didn't expect to see any issues with this scope at all, and we didn't, but it's a nice thing to check anyway to make sure everything is going well with the scope. Overall, I was very, very pleased with the scope. It acted exactly like I would expect it to, with the exception of the two little issues, the turret slipping and trying to figure out how to get the zero stop, or how to dial below the zero stop on it. Everything else was good to go. The only thing that is lacking is the scope doesn't have any way to lock the turrets, so the turrets are always free spinning. I don't really hold that against the scope. There's a pretty good amount of pressure before the turrets start to move, so you don't really have to worry about the turrets just spinning freely while you're carrying or while you're moving from stage to stage. You do still want to make sure that you check the turrets as soon as you pull the rifle out of the bag, because it can roll when you're throwing it in the bag or pulling it out of the bag, etc. So that's one of the few things that's missing off of this scope that is on some of the other scopes in the same range, such as the Bushnell ERS or XRS scopes, but not a big deal. The turret feel on the scope is really nice. For 14 mils per rev, I expected to have one of the buzzsaw turrets, I'll call them. One of the ones where you dial the turret and it's just like zzz, it's very hard to hit specific points when you're dialing quickly. This one, you can get to the points. The clicks are still a little bit closer together than I would like, but they still feel very nice and really shouldn't be a problem for you to get your zero dialed in quickly. With the larger diameter of the turret, it makes it a little bit easier to hit the stop exactly where you want it to be. Same thing with the windage turret. We didn't do a lot of dialing with the windage turret, but it adjusts true and it dials true. Overall, really, I like the scope. It is one of the larger scopes that we use. Looking at the specs here, the length overall is 15.9 inches, so it is one of the larger scopes that we see in PRS type competition. I've got the specs over here. The weight on it, we didn't throw it on a scale, but the listed weight on it is 33.5 ounces, so if you're trying to look at where that compares. Once it's on the rifle, we really didn't notice it to be an overly heavy scope. We didn't notice the rifle trying to roll over on us, so that is good to go. We've got 25 mils of elevation listed for the scope. Because of the way the turrets are set up, we didn't test the extreme elevation of the scope. We tested it to the extent that we would need to use it for any regular short action calibers, and it worked just fine within those distances. With that many mils on tap, you should be good for a very wide range of calibers. Again, overall, the scope performed very, very well, and we can definitely recommend the Kahles K624i. And we will leave a link down below to where you can go pick up your scope, and we'll leave a link to HPS's website where you can get more details. We'll also throw a slide up here at the end that gives you all the specs. I didn't think you guys wanted to hear me run through each one of the specs for the rifle scope. So we had a great time using the scope. Didn't have really any issues with it, again, other than the two that I spoke with. And I'm kind of be a little bit sad to see this go back to HPS. I really wish we could have shot it in a couple of more matches. So if you guys have any questions for the Kahles K624i, please leave them in the comments section below or send it to us on Facebook or Twitter. If you've liked this video, please make sure you like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, get out and shoot!